The last two things that we're going to revise for as we create a rough draft, that is 3 paragraphs, you are going to have, by the time you're ready to turn in your rough draft, a claim that will represent later your introduction, 2 body paragraphs, and a so what conclusion. That's what you're going to be turning in, basically 3 draft paragraphs. Sorry. So there's 2 documents that is in the post that says staying on track with your essay. One is called integrating quotes, sentence starters, or frames, and one is called transitions. Open those 2 documents and open your rough draft. So I have 3 things open to start making those revisions. We're looking at these 3 bold bullet points here to stay on track. So you're framing your evidence using integration sentence frames. You're adding transitions between paragraphs and ideas. That's our next step. So I have first my rough draft open. I have a claim. I have 2 sentences that explain or detail out what my claim means. I have 1 quote from Animal Farm with an explanation, and I have 1 quote from nonfiction source with an explanation to build and justify each of those body paragraphs. So I have 2 of those, and I've already written my so what conclusion. That is a separate thing to do. All right, so I'm going to start with integrating quotes. We need to do a few things with literary quotes, and this is from Animal Farm. I need to first contextualize the literature. So, what is happening in the book? Who are these characters? What is the background of this quote to make it make sense for our reader? We have to assume they have not read Animal Farm. So, before I go in there and quote something from Animal Farm, I need to give a little summary of what happened in the book to set up this quote. So, after I do that, I also need to integrate that quote by introducing the quotation. So I will say, in X's view, or something like that, who is my writer? My writer wrote the quote. So, for example, in a second, I'm going to show you how I have a background for an Animal Farm quote for literature. So I explain who are the characters, what's happening in the book, what does it mean. Then I introduce the quote with quotation marks, and then I will explain the quote and why that Animal Farm example backs up both my body paragraph sentence and my claim. So I'm going to write that out, and then we'll get back together. All right, so now I've done 3 things to fit in my quote for the literature. I introduced the background by saying the novel and the writer. So, what kind of thing it is, who wrote it, and what's the title. So, you can use this as well. So, to set up you and your background of your literature. So, I wrote in Orwell's novel Animal Farm. He argues, so the writer argues, and then I set up the background of who the character is that says the quote, why he's saying the quote, and what it matters in the bigger picture of Animal Farm. So before I do my quote at all. So he argues the character of Snowball works to create a fair and just system that will support the working class. In order to do this, he manipulates the language of the laws, and then I explain how he's manipulating the language of the laws. That is from the authorial action. So you're choosing one of these to say what the writer is writing about in the novel. Then we go into the quote, and I introduce the quote and give the page number exactly. So then I go down to introducing quotations. You can choose this one, you can choose this one. I used X writes, but you can say X states or something like that. And then the page number goes right after it to make sure we know where it came from. Then I explain my quote and what it means. And that comes from that document that we did of the quote explanation. So I use now a sentence frame for explaining a quote, and I used X's point is that. So X is the writer here. X is always, for the most part, the writer or the speaker. So I used X's point is that, and then I explained that quote and how it matches my body paragraph point. The next thing I'm going to do is use a transition to connect that piece of evidence together with my nonfiction quote or my second quote. So I'm going to add something that says, here's another idea. Here's more of idea for this. So I'm going to write similarly. So I'm going to use the transition similarly because these two quotes go together. So first transition, similarly. And now I just need to introduce this quote because this is nonfiction and I don't need a background of this. I just need the actual quote. But I need to say who's the writer, where did it come from, what's the title. I'm going to introduce the quote and then I'm going to explain it again. So let me do that. All right, so I introduced the writer, the type of thing, and the title of my next quote just right off the bat with a transition. So I said similarly, so it's cueing the writer, here's another idea from a nonfiction source, and this is what they write. So this is one of my sentence frames right to introducing the quote. So I use introducing the quote and I say, what did I use? Agrees when he writes. So person agrees when he writes, and then quote. So I use that sentence frame and the quote and the page number right after it. Then I explain that quote and the connection. So I go down here and I use this one basically, and I use the writer's name. So X is the writer's name. Basically, person is saying, and then I explain what that quote means. The last thing I'm going to do to end my body paragraph is another transition. And this transition is linking body paragraph 1 with body paragraph 2. So I'm going to go back to my transition idea and I'm going to link up here using the transition accordingly, which means next step. So accordingly. And now I'm going to explain how paragraph 1 matches paragraph 2. My first paragraph is using language. My second paragraph is using propaganda. So I'm going to say accordingly. Shoot, my son's preschool is calling. Accordingly, leaders use propaganda to control the working class. So I looked at my second body paragraph. What am I talking about? Propaganda. I give a little preview phrase with a transition saying this is what's next and how these body paragraphs work together. So I have another transition there. And that's how we're framing out our body paragraphs. Thank you. With transitions and integration frames. Bye.